Khalil Brooks was 38 years old, and he believed exactly one thing above everything else. A man's word is the only inheritance nobody can repossess. He built his whole life on that belief, poured concrete into it, framed walls around it, hung doors that closed soft and true. He believed it the day he married Zora Brooks. He still believed it the morning he signed the last line of the papers that ended it. That morning, the disruption came fast. At 9:47 a.m., inside a courtroom at the Cook County Courthouse on Washington Street in downtown Chicago, Khalil set down the pen. Zora sat across the table in a cream-colored coat, and the corner of her mouth curled up. Not sadness, not even relief. Something closer to a woman who believed she'd just won. Out in the marble hallway, Victor Langford waited with his hands in his pockets, checking his watch like a man who already knew what came next. But here's the thing about a man who never raises his voice. You never know what he's already arranged behind the silence. Because in exactly 3 minutes, a black Maybach was going to glide up to the curb on Washington Street. And Zora, who assumed Khalil would be walking home, or worse, calling a rideshare like the humbled man she thought she was leaving behind, was about to watch her ex-husband step into a car she couldn't have afforded in her best year. Before we get into how a 38-year-old construction foreman walked out of his own divorce and into a fortune, let's go back to that quieter morning. Because real justice doesn't announce itself with sirens. It arrives the way Khalil's uncle always said the good ones do. Quiet, on time, and already paid for. The day had started like any other in the two-flat on South Champlain Avenue in Bronzeville. Rain from the night before still sat in the gutters, catching the gray of the Chicago sky. Khalil had been up since 5, same as every workday for 20 years. Boots by the door, coffee black, the radio turned low. He'd pressed his one good Navy suit himself the night before and hung it on the closet door like a man dressing for a funeral. In a way, he was. He thought briefly of a spring afternoon 11 years earlier. A backyard on Champlain Avenue strung with borrowed lights, his father still alive then, standing beside him under a trellis Khalil had built with his own hands the week before the wedding. Zora had cried real tears that day, or at least he'd believed they were real at the time. My wife. He used to say it like a vow renewed every morning. Now the words just sat in his chest like a stone he hadn't set down yet. Zora came downstairs already dressed for court, heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown. She didn't look at him. She looked at her phone. "You're not going to say anything?" she'd asked, not quite meeting his eyes. "Said everything I needed to a long time ago," Khalil answered. "You just weren't listening." She'd laughed at that, short, dismissive, the way she'd laughed at him more and more over the last 2 years. At his boots by the door, at the calluses on his hands, at the fact that he still drove the same Ford F-150 he'd had since before they married, even after she started parking a leased Range Rover in the driveway of a house he'd built with his own crew. The drive downtown was silent. Lakeshore Drive stretched out gray and glassy beside them, the water the color of an old nickel. Khalil kept both hands on the wheel and didn't turn on the radio. Inside the courtroom, it took 11 minutes. The judge read the language in a flat, practiced voice. Zora signed first, her signature a wide, confident loop. Khalil signed second, his handwriting steady, unhurried, the same signature he used on every contract, every permit, every promise he intended to keep. When it was done, he stood. He didn't look at Zora. He didn't look at Victor through the glass. He gave the judge a small nod, turned, and walked out. Not fast, not slow. A man who had somewhere to be. At the top of the courthouse steps, Khalil paused, just for a moment, and let the cold morning air fill his lungs. Below him, Washington Street moved the way it always did, indifferent to the small devastations taking place inside the building behind him. He looked down at his left hand, bare now, a pale band of untanned skin still marking where a ring used to sit. He'd taken it off 8 months earlier, the same night Nia first showed him the phone records. Some part of him had known, even then, that this walk down these steps was already coming. For a moment, without meaning to, he remembered the exact weight of sliding that ring onto his own finger at 28. The church thick with the smell of lilies and rain, his father's eyes wet in the second pew. He let himself have the memory for 3 seconds, no longer. A man could grieve a thing and still know precisely what came next. For Khalil, the two had never been opposites. Zora stayed behind a moment longer, gathering papers into a leather folio Victor had bought her for her birthday. Through the glass door of the courtroom, she watched her ex-husband descend the wide stone steps into the gray Chicago morning, and she smiled at Victor, like a woman checking an item off a list. Then the door swung open, and what Zora saw next made her stop cold. A Maybach, black, spotless, the kind of car that didn't belong on Washington Street outside a courthouse, eased to the curb. A driver in a dark suit stepped out, walked around, and opened the rear door before Khalil had even reached the sidewalk. From the back seat stepped a tall, silver-haired man in his late 60s, dressed like old money that had never once needed to prove itself. He looked at Khalil and said only, "Son, it's time." Khalil didn't hesitate. He climbed in. The door shut with a soft, expensive click. Zora pushed through the courthouse doors just in time to see the car pull away, and she stood frozen on the top step, her folio clutched to her chest. "Whose car is that?" Victor asked beside her, his voice suddenly smaller than it had been all morning. Zora didn't answer. She just watched the Maybach merge into traffic on Michigan Avenue, carrying away the man she'd just spent 5 minutes signing out of her life. And she felt, for the first time in a long while, a cold and unfamiliar thing crawl up the back of her neck. Doubt. Inside the car, Reggie Brooks studied his nephew's face for a long moment before he spoke again. "The moment she filed," he said quietly, "the family trust activated. Everything your father left behind, it's yours now. Fully. Completely." Khalil looked out the window at the lake sliding by and said nothing. But the corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. What Zora didn't know yet, what she wouldn't understand for months, was that the quietest man in the room had been 3 steps ahead of her the entire time. What was Khalil hiding all along, and just how long had he known? 18 months before that courthouse morning, something in Zora Brooks had started to shift. Quietly at first, the way a house settles before anyone notices the crack in the plaster. It began with a phrase. "Modern marriages don't have to look like our parents," she told Khalil one night over dinner, not quite looking at him, turning her wine glass slowly by the stem. "Some couples do things differently now. Open, honest, less rigid." Khalil set down his fork. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. "You asking me something or telling me something?" he said. "I'm just saying. People evolve." He studied her for a long moment. 20 years on job sites had taught him to read structural stress before a wall ever cracked. The hairline shift in a beam, the way weight moves before it fails. He saw it now on his wife's face. Something had already shifted. She just hadn't told him where the load had gone. "All right," he said finally. "Let's try it your way. Let's see." He wasn't agreeing. He was watching. There had been a time, early on, before the promotions she stopped mentioning and the fundraisers she stopped inviting him to, when Zora used to drive out to his job sites on her lunch break just to bring him a sandwich and watch him work from the cab of his truck. She used to say she liked the sound of nail guns, said it sounded like something getting built instead of something falling apart. Khalil thought about that sandwich sometimes, in the years that followed. The way a man thinks about a house that used to stand somewhere, before the lot went empty. Over the following months, Zora came home later. She started keeping her phone face down on the counter, then face down and locked, then not on the counter at all. She deleted messages fast enough that Khalil noticed the muscle memory in her thumb before he noticed anything on the screen itself. She bought a new Cartier bracelet on what she said was a work bonus, though Khalil had done the household books himself for 6 years running and knew exactly what her bonuses looked like. He never asked where the bracelet came from. He never asked where she'd been on the Thursday nights she said were girls' dinners that no friend of hers seemed to remember when he ran into them at the grocery store on 47th Street. Once, coming home from a double shift near midnight, Khalil caught the faint trace of unfamiliar cologne lingering in the front hallway. He told himself, the way a tired man tells himself a lot of things, that it was probably nothing. He just kept working. Kept driving out to the job sites near O'Hare before sunrise, kept coming home late, kept his voice level at the dinner table. And behind that steadiness, behind the calluses and the quiet, he'd already begun moving pieces no one else could see. 2 years earlier, at a fundraiser in Grant Park, Zora had introduced him to a table of her new friends from the marketing firm where she'd just been promoted. "This is my husband, Khalil," she'd said, sliding her hand along his arm with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He builds things, very hands-on." A small laugh rippled around the table. Polite, dismissive, the kind of laugh reserved for a man everyone had already decided wasn't worth a second sentence. That same month, Khalil had turned down a regional project management position that would have doubled his salary and kept him behind a desk in the loop 5 days a week. Zora had asked him to. "I need you here," she'd said then. "Steady, present." He believed her. He turned down the promotion, stayed on the cruise, kept working nights and doubles to cover her mother's hospital bills the year the woman's heart gave out twice in 8 months. There were nights he sat outside the hospital in the truck with the engine off, letting himself feel the exhaustion for exactly 5 minutes before walking back inside with a steady face, because that was what a husband did. He never told her about those 5 minutes. Some weights he'd decided long before any of this began, a man carries alone, so the people he loves never have to feel the true size of them. He never once brought any of that up to her face. Not the fundraiser, not the promotion he gave up, not the hospital bills. A lesser man might have thrown it back at her during an argument, used it as a weapon. Khalil filed it away instead, the way he filed away every receipt, every bank transfer, every quiet insult. Evidence, not ammunition. His sister Nia noticed before anyone. Nia Brooks had spent 14 years in corporate compliance downtown, and she had a nose for a story that didn't add up. One Sunday after church, she pulled Khalil aside in the parking lot of Trinity United, her voice low. The wind off the lake cut through the parking lot, and Nia pulled her coat tighter around herself, glancing once toward the church doors before she spoke. "Zora's lawyer," she said. "The one she's been meeting with quietly for the past month and a half? That's not a divorce lawyer she found on her own, Khalil. That's someone connected to the family trust. Uncle Reggie's people flagged it the second she made contact." Khalil absorbed that the way he absorbed everything. Still unreadable, filing it into place. "She thinks she's building a case against me," he said finally. "She's building a case against a version of you that doesn't exist," Nia said. "She thinks you're the same man who married her at 28 with nothing but a tool belt and a dream. She has no idea what Dad set up before he passed. And she has no idea you've already moved everything into the trust's protection." That was the truth nobody at that Grant Park table would have believed. 2 years before the divorce papers were ever drawn up, Khalil had quietly transferred every asset he'd built, the small rental properties, his shares in the family construction company, even the house on Champlain, into a trust his father had structured 7 years earlier, a trust that triggered full control to Khalil the moment any divorce filing was made against him. His father had built that safeguard into the family legacy long before Zora ever walked into their lives, back when he told a much younger Khalil, "Love with your whole heart, son, but protect what your grandfather bled for." Zora, for all her scheming, had tried to get ahead of it, more than once. Thinking Khalil was already asleep, she'd sat at his laptop after midnight and tried to access the trust portal, guessing passwords, guessing security questions, growing more frustrated with every failed attempt. That wasn't the only night. Over 6 weeks that spring, she tried 4 separate times and never got past the first screen. The questions were things only Khalil knew: the name of the dog his father had before he was born, the street in Mississippi where his grandfather first bought land as a free man. She thought she was one password away from control. She'd been trying to steal something for months before she ever filed the papers. She just hadn't found the door yet. Khalil watched all of it happen: the late nights, the deleted messages, the new jewelry, the lawyer visits she thought were secret. And he said nothing. Not out of weakness, out of strategy. Every day she grew bolder, she also grew careless. And every careless move was one more brick in a wall she didn't know she was building around herself. My wife thought his silence meant he hadn't noticed. She was wrong. His silence meant he'd already seen everything he needed to see, and he was simply waiting for her to sign the one document that would hand him everything, legally, cleanly, without a single raised voice. By the time she filed for divorce, Khalil Brooks had been 3 moves ahead of her for over a year. She was about to find out just how far ahead. Next time, the papers get signed, and the real story finally comes out. Zora tried to break into the family trust 4 separate times before she ever filed for divorce. Yes or no? Does that make her a calculated thief? Not just an unfaithful wife? The Maybach moved smooth and silent down Lakeshore Drive. Lake Michigan spread out flat and gray-blue on one side, the skyline rising sharp on the other. Reggie Brooks reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an iPad, its screen glowing soft against the tinted windows. "Take a look at this, son," he said, handing it over. Khalil took the tablet. The light from the screen washed over the sharp lines of his face, catching the set of his jaw. He scrolled slowly through page after page: account summaries, deed transfers, a balance sheet with more zeros than he'd ever seen attached to his own name. "The moment Zora filed this morning," Reggie said, his voice low and even, "the trust your father set up activated exactly the way he designed it. You now hold 68% controlling interest across the entire Brooks Construction portfolio, along with the family foundation. Current trust value? Just over $47 million. "But wasn't the land already protected?" Khalil asked. "I moved most of it in 2 years ago." "Protected, yes," Reggie said. "Controlled by the trustee, me, until today. That's how your father built the language. The assets stay shielded the moment you place them in trust, but full operating control only transfers to you if a divorce filing hits the county record. That's the clause that fired this morning. Everything you protected 2 years ago is finally, entirely yours to run." Khalil sat with that in silence for a long moment, staring out at the water. He thought about the nights in the site trailer near O'Hare, rain hammering the tin roof, while Zora Brooks video called him just to show off a new handbag, paid for with money he'd wired her that same week. He thought, too, of the nights he'd priced out her mother's second cardiac procedure by phone flashlight because the site had no signal for his laptop, promising the hospital's financial office he'd have the copay by Friday. He'd made that promise 4 times that year. He'd kept it every single time. Reggie continued. "There's more. The security system at the Bronzeville house. We upgraded it 14 months ago. Full storage. Every conversation. Every time Victor Langford let himself in while you were working night shifts. That landed like a struck nail. Khalil's jaw tightened, just slightly, the only sign he gave. Outside the window, the lake had gone the color of wet slate, and for one unguarded second he was back in the backyard on Champlain Avenue, his father's hand steady on his shoulder beneath the trellis he'd built the week before the wedding. He wondered whether his father had sensed even then that steadiness alone couldn't hold up every wall, that some structures fail no matter how sound the foundation if the other side was never planning to stay. Reggie watched his nephew's face carefully, the way a man watches wet concrete for the first hairline crack, and let the silence sit a moment before he spoke again. "You knew," Khalil said. It wasn't a question. "I suspected," Reggie corrected gently. "Your sister confirmed it." "We didn't tell you because you needed to make your own choices without us pushing your hand. A man has to walk into his own decisions, son, or he'll never trust the ground under him again." Khalil looked back down at the tablet, at the folder of security footage timestamps, at the neat legal language confirming what he already knew in his bones, but had never let himself say out loud. "I turned down 3 project management offers for her," Khalil said quietly. "Stayed on the cruise so I'd be home more. Worked doubles at the O'Hare site so her mother's cardiac unit didn't go on a payment plan. All of it." "I know," Reggie said. "And every dollar of it, every sacrifice, it's about to be repaid in ways you can't yet imagine." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Khalil felt something move through his chest that wasn't grief and wasn't anger. It was lighter than both, something closer to release. What Khalil felt wasn't triumph. It was the quiet unclenching of a man who feared for 2 years that being decent made him invisible. His real want was never the money. It was proof that patience isn't the same thing as weakness. And underneath the calm was a genuine pull toward anger, toward wanting to confront her right there in the car, a pull he overrode because the boy who watched his father build a legacy brick by brick had learned that the moment you raise your voice, you hand the other person control of the room. Because here was the truth nobody at that courthouse understood yet. Zora believed she'd been the one to end the marriage on her terms, walking away with her dignity and a new man waiting in the wings. What she didn't know, what she was about to learn, piece by careful piece, was that her husband had already read the entire script of their marriage's final act long before she ever wrote it. Every late-night password attempt on that trust portal, every deleted message, every dismissive laugh at a party, all of it had been logged, dated, and quietly filed away by a man patient enough to let her convict herself. "There's something else," Reggie added, setting the tablet aside. "Your father built a clause into the original trust language, one your mother insisted on, God rest her. If a spouse is found to have acted in bad faith during the marriage, infidelity, asset concealment, attempted fraud against the trust, that spouse forfeits any claim to community property tied to Brooks' family holdings. Permanently, no negotiation." Khalil turned to face his uncle fully now. "She tried to access the trust portal. 4 times, you said." "4 that we caught," Reggie said. "Over 6 weeks. Security questions she couldn't answer. Your father's dog's name. The street in Mississippi where your grandfather first bought land. She never got past the front gate. But she tried." The car turned off Lakeshore Drive onto a quieter road lined with old elms, heading toward the lakefront estate Reggie had arranged. Khalil sat back against the leather seat and let it settle over him. Not the money, though the money was real and considerable. What settled over him was something closer to vindication for every year he'd spent being underestimated by people who mistook his quiet for weakness. "You could have told me all this sooner," Khalil said, not with resentment, just observation. "And rob you of doing it right?" Reggie shook his head. "A man who's handed his power before he's earned the clarity to use it wisely. That man makes mistakes with it. You needed to walk out of that courtroom on your own 2 feet, carrying your own dignity before anyone put a single dollar back in your hands. That's how your father would have wanted it done. Quiet, earned, undeniable." Khalil nodded slowly, looking back out the window as the lake disappeared behind a line of trees. "Victor Langford," Khalil said after a moment. "Does she know yet what he actually is?" Reggie's expression flickered, something close to pity, though not for Khalil. "No," he said. "And that particular lesson is going to hurt a great deal more than this one." The Maybach rolled through a private gate, gravel crunching soft beneath the tires, and Khalil Brooks understood in that moment that the life he'd quietly assembled behind his own silence was only just beginning to reveal itself. Everything up to now, the courthouse, the ride, the numbers on the screen, had only been the opening door. If Khalil knew everything a year in advance, what else has he been hiding? And is there a limit to how far quiet patience can go before it becomes something else entirely? The penthouse Reggie had arranged sat high above the lakefront, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing a wide gray sweep of Michigan under a darkening sky. Mia Brooks was already there when they arrived, a thick folder squared neatly on the glass table in front of her, her laptop open, her face set in the particular calm of a woman who has spent 14 years learning to deliver bad news without flinching. "Sit down," she told her brother. "There's more, and you need to hear all of it before tonight ends." Khalil sat. Reggie stood near the window, arms folded, saying nothing. Nia turned the laptop screen toward him. "This is an independent forensic report," she said, her voice flat and precise, the voice she used in depositions. Outside, the lake had gone the color of gunmetal under the last gray light, and somewhere below, a foghorn sounded once, long and low, swallowed almost immediately by the hush of the room. "Zora forged your signature 3 separate times across 3 different documents over the last 6 months. She attempted to transfer a commercial lot on the south side and 2 investment accounts out of joint holdings." Khalil sat very still, listening the way he listened to a foreman describe a structural failure, absorbing the damage before deciding what to do about it. "There's something worse," Nia continued. "One of the documents she forged was for a parcel of land you moved into the trust 2 years ago, which means she was trying to steal something that didn't belong to her anymore," Khalil finished quietly. "Something that was already gone." "Exactly," Nia said. "She still thinks you're the man she described at that fundraiser 2 years ago. The one she called hands-on like it was an insult. She has no idea how far outside her reach you'd already moved." What cut Khalil wasn't the forged signature. It was what it revealed about her motive. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing him as a partner and started seeing him as an obstacle standing between her and a life she thought she deserved. His deepest fear had never been losing the money. It was the confirmation that his years of sacrifice had been read by her as foolishness instead of love. And in that moment he faced a real inner conflict. The urge to expose and punish her warring with the instinct that had guided him his whole life. That dignity, once spent on revenge, doesn't come back. He stood and walked to the window, hands loose at his sides, looking out at the city lights beginning to flicker on across the skyline. "All those years," he said, mostly to himself, "I thought I was building a family. Turns out, I was building a cage and handing her the key." Reggie's voice came gentle from behind him. "Victor Langford isn't clean either, son. He's been trying to work his way into conversations with two of our commercial partners over the last 4 months. Fishing for information. Probably hoping to get ahead of whatever settlement he assumed was coming. We blacklisted him from every Brooks-affiliated project months ago. He's been operating blind this whole time, same as her. He thought he was marrying into money, Naya added. What he actually did was attach himself to a woman who's about to have nothing. The community foundation stayed clean through all of this, at least, Reggie added, almost as an afterthought. Layla Harper's kept it running herself the past couple of years. No small thing, given everything else falling apart around it. Khalil recognized the name. A woman he'd crossed paths with twice at ribbon cuttings for the youth center on 51st Street. Always steady, always exactly where she said she'd be. He hadn't thought about her in months. He didn't think much about her now, either. Not yet. But the name settled somewhere in the back of his mind. Quiet, the way a good foundation settles before anyone builds on top of it. For a moment, the room held nothing but the low hum of the building's heating system and the faint tick of Nia's laptop cooling against the glass table. Khalil let his eyes close, just for 3 full seconds. Not sleep, only the kind of stillness a man allows himself once, quietly, before he has to be strong again for whatever the rest of the night still owed him. Naya had always privately suspected part of what drove Zora was her own upbringing. A childhood spent watching her mother stretch grocery money thin at the end of every month, promising things would be different one day. Understanding where a wound came from, though, never excused where a person chose to point it. Khalil turned back from the window. His face hadn't changed much, the same steady jaw, the same measured stillness, but something behind his eyes had shifted, hardened into a kind of clarity that hadn't been there an hour earlier. "What happens now?" he asked. "With the forgery?" "Legally," Nia said, "it strips any remaining claim she might have tried to make on community assets, even the ones outside the trust. Combined with the infidelity clause your father built in, she walks away from this marriage with exactly what she came into it with, nothing more." "And the criminal exposure?" Khalil asked. Nia hesitated, glancing at Reggie before answering. "That's your call. We have enough documentation to pursue forgery charges if you want to. Most families in our position would." Khalil was quiet for a long moment. The old anger, the kind that wanted to make someone hurt the way you'd been hurt, rose up in him briefly, then settled, the way rough water settles once it finds its level. "No," he said finally. "I'm not interested in destroying her. I'm interested in building something she can never touch again. Let the trust handle the rest, quietly. She'll understand what she lost soon enough, in her own time, in front of the people whose opinion she cares about most." Reggie's mouth curved into something like pride. "Your father used to say the same thing. Said real power doesn't need an audience for the moment it's used, only for the moment it's revealed." Nia closed the laptop gently. "There's one more thing," she said. "Small, but it matters. The lawyer Zora hired 18 months ago, the one she thought she found on her own, he's been quietly reporting relevant filings back to our family's legal team the entire time, under an old referral agreement none of us ever bothered to cancel. She's been building her case in a room with glass walls and thought it was private." Khalil almost laughed at that. A short, dry exhale, more disbelief than humor. Every door Zora had thought she was slipping through quietly had in fact been watched, logged, and accounted for since before she ever opened it. He sat back down across from his sister, elbows on his knees, and let the full weight of the evening settle over him. Not as devastation anymore, but as clarity. 2 years of swallowed insults. 2 years of turned-down promotions and double shifts, and a wife who'd stopped seeing him the moment she decided she deserved more than a man who built things with his hands. All of it had led here, to this room, to this folder, to this quiet, undeniable proof that patience, real patience, the kind that costs something every single day you hold on to it, pays interest that no amount of forged paperwork can ever touch.
"All right," Khalil said finally, his voice steady again. "Then let's build something worth all of it." Outside the window, the Chicago skyline glittered on, indifferent and beautiful, the same as it had every night of his marriage, the only witness that had been there for all of it, and the only one that had never lied to him. Just when it seemed like Zora had lost everything a marriage could cost her, one more secret was still waiting to surface. What do you think Khalil does next? Walk away quietly? Or make sure the whole community finds out exactly who Zora really is? That morning, before the picnic, Khalil had stood alone in the kitchen of the house on Champlain Avenue, the same house Zora had never once helped him finish painting. Turning a coffee mug slowly in his hands, while the sun came up over the small garden he'd started the week the papers were finalized. He thought of something his father used to say. You don't rebuild a thing by rushing it. You rebuild it by getting the foundation right the first time and letting everything else follow. He rinsed the mug, set it in the rack, and drove to the park with nothing left in his chest but quiet. Grant Park was alive with the sound of a community picnic. Children shrieking with laughter near the fountain, the smell of barbecue smoke drifting low over the grass, an old gospel playlist crackling out of a portable speaker somebody's grandmother had insisted on bringing every year since the Clinton administration. Hundreds of people from Bronzeville and the South Side had turned out, folding chairs and coolers scattered across the lawn like they'd been there since sunrise. Khalil Brooks stood near the edge of the gathering in a dark, well-cut suit, calm and unhurried the way he always was. Beside him stood Layla Harper in a soft blazer, her laugh easy and warm as she talked with two little girls asking about the community garden project. He and Layla had known each other for 2 years through that same garden committee, nothing more than a nod and a shared coffee here and there, back when he was still technically a married man with nothing left of a marriage but the paperwork. It was only in the last several months, once there was truly nothing left to protect, that the nod had turned into something else. That was when Zora appeared. She wore a bright red dress, the kind meant to be seen from across a lawn, a gift bag from an expensive boutique dangling from one wrist. Her smile was practiced, careful, but her eyes gave her away, darting, uncertain. The eyes of a woman walking into a place she no longer had any right to. "Khalil," she said, stopping a few feet from him and Layla, her voice pitched just a little too bright. "Could we talk? Just for a minute?" For half a second, unbidden, Khalil thought of the sandwiches she used to bring him at the job site on her lunch breaks. The way she'd said the sound of nail guns reminded her of something being built instead of something falling apart. He let the memory move through him like weather, there and then gone, taking nothing with it when it left. Khalil said nothing at first. He simply looked at her, the way he'd learned to look at a wall before deciding whether it needed to come down or could still be saved. It couldn't be saved. He already knew that. "I know things got complicated," Zora pushed on when he didn't answer. "But I want you to know, Victor used me. He lied to me about a lot of things. I have proof, if you'll just look." She pulled a folded stack of papers from her purse, hands trembling slightly as she held them out. A few feet away, a child's laughter rang out, bright and oblivious to the small, tense circle forming near the picnic tables. Naya, standing just behind her brother, glanced at her phone screen for less than 3 seconds before shaking her head. "Victor Langford was cut off from every Brooks-affiliated project months ago, Zora," Nia said. Not unkindly, but without softening it either. "Long before today. Whatever's in those papers, it's already old news." Zora's face went still. A couple of nearby neighbors, close enough to catch the exchange, exchanged a glance and quietly looked away,
the way people do when they realize they've stumbled into something that isn't theirs to watch. "I helped build this," Zora said, her voice rising slightly, a last grasp for footing. "This community project. I was part of that too." "You attended 2 fundraisers," Nia said simply. "That's not the same thing." Layla Harper spoke then, her voice quiet, without any edge in it at all. "You had everything, Zora," she said, "and you walked away from it long before anyone forced your hand. That's not on him, and it isn't on me either. Whatever you came here hoping to find, I don't think it's here anymore." Zora stood still for a long moment, her cheeks warm with an embarrassment that had nowhere to go, no crowd to perform for, just a handful of people close enough to see it. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away on her own, her heels catching awkwardly in the grass. Khalil watched her go without satisfaction and without cruelty, just a quiet, settled kind of peace. He reached over and took Layla's hand, feeling a warmth in that simple gesture he hadn't felt in the better part of 7 years. "You didn't have to say all that," he told her softly. "I know," Layla said. "But it needed saying, and it wasn't going to be you. You've spent enough years being the one who stays quiet." He almost smiled at that. Almost. Later, as the picnic wound down and the sky over the lake turned the soft orange of a Chicago summer evening, Khalil sat on a bench near the water with Layla, watching a group of kids chase a soccer ball across the grass. Nia joined them a moment, dropping into the space beside her brother with the tired satisfaction of a woman who'd spent the afternoon quietly making sure the truth landed exactly where it needed to. "She's not going to bother you again," Nia said. "Word travels fast in this community, even the quiet kind." "I'm not worried about that anymore," Khalil said, and for the first time in a long while, he meant it completely. He looked out at the water, at the skyline catching the last of the light, at the people around him who had known his family for generations and had never once needed him to prove anything to them. He thought about his father, about the trust built 7 years in advance, about a lifetime of quiet decisions finally paying out exactly the way they were designed to. Justice, he was learning, rarely needed to be loud. It just needed to arrive on time, in front of the people who mattered most. But Khalil wasn't finished yet. The biggest reveal of all was still waiting, just 6 months down the road. 6 months later, the groundbreaking ceremony for Langston Legacy Homes drew hundreds out to a stretch of once empty lots in Bronzeville. Families, children, longtime residents, city council members, and neighbors who could still remember when this block had nothing on it but weeds and a chain-link fence. Khalil Brooks stood on a small wooden platform in a dark suit, Layla Harper beside him in an elegant blazer, her hand resting lightly against his arm. Behind them, a row of shovels waited, ribbons tied to their handles, ready for the photograph that would run in the neighborhood paper by that Friday. "Today, I'm not just breaking ground on houses," Khalil said, his voice carrying easily across the crowd, steady and warm. "I'm breaking ground on opportunity. For kids who remind me of myself, whose grandparents built this city with their own 2 hands, and never once got their names on a plaque for it." He announced the Brooks Future Scholarship, a $2.3 million fund for young people from the neighborhood pursuing trades and construction management, the exact path a lot of people once told him wasn't worth respecting. In the front row, Naya's 15-year-old son Malcolm sat wide-eyed in a folding chair, watching his uncle with the kind of open, unguarded admiration Khalil remembered feeling for his own father at that same age. Khalil caught the boy's eye for just a second and gave him the same small nod his own father used to give him from across a job site. The nod that meant, "I see you. Keep going." Malcolm straightened in his chair, without quite knowing why, the way boys do when a man they admire finally looks at them like they matter. It struck Khalil, standing there, that legacy was never really about the number sitting in a trust account. It was about which kids in the crowd started believing something different about themselves because of what happened next. Then, just before he stepped down, an old audio clip played over the sound system. A recording from years earlier, Zora's voice unmistakable, dismissive, cutting through the warm afternoon air. "My husband's family is just a bunch of contractors, no real vision." A ripple moved through the crowd. Near the back, half hidden by a tree, Zora stood frozen, color draining from her face as neighbor after neighbor turned to glance her way. Khalil didn't flinch, and he didn't raise his voice. "This scholarship comes with one condition," he said calmly. "It will never be connected to anyone who once tried to walk away from this family's legacy and take credit for it on the way out. Any community fund she once claimed to have helped build will now be managed entirely by Layla Harper's foundation going forward." The applause that followed rolled across the lot like thunder. Zora turned and walked quickly toward the edge of the crowd, disappearing before anyone could catch her eye again. The most public moment of humiliation she had ever known, delivered without a single raised voice in front of the very community she'd once looked down on. Afterward, as the crowd thinned and the sun dropped low over the lake, Khalil and Layla walked along the water's edge together, hand in hand. Gulls cried somewhere out over the breakwater, and the day's last warmth still lingered in the concrete beneath their feet. Khalil thought of a word he used to say without thinking, "my wife," and how long it had taken him to understand that a title was never the same thing as the truth underneath it. "You saved me from a life spent building things for everyone else," he told Layla quietly, "and forgetting to build anything for myself." Layla just smiled and let the silence hold the rest of it. Zora Brooks didn't just lose a marriage that day. She lost the money, the community standing, and the respect of every neighbor who'd once believed her version of the story. Meanwhile, Khalil had taken every ounce of that old pain and turned it into something permanent. A legacy that would outlast all of it. Built for people who needed it far more than she ever had. This story reminds us that the people who loved us well leave behind small, particular habits worth keeping. Not grand gestures, just details. If you're the one who kept your word while someone else went looking for something shinier, know your steadiness was never wasted. Every Thursday evening, sit at the kitchen table with the same mug you've had for 20 years and write down one thing you did right that week, just for yourself, not for anyone watching. Teach your grandson to shake a man's hand, look him in the eye, and mean it, the way you once taught your own husband to mean his vows. Keep Betty's number taped inside the cabinet door and call her before the coffee's gone cold. Truth was never loud. It just needed someone patient enough to still be standing there when it finally showed up. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, tell us about them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for the next story of quiet justice. Human writers poured their soul into these scripts to expose injustice and celebrate humanity. AI served as a